My name is Moshe Neuman. My father's name was Rabbi Avrom Eliezer Neuman, and my mother's name was Miriam Razel. Her maiden name was Mermelstein. My father was born in a city called Berexaz. My mother was born in a smaller town in a city called Chetfolva. Before the war, my father had 3 brothers and 1 sister, and my mother had 4 brothers, and she was the only daughter. It was the reverse. There weren't that many Jewish families in that little small town, maybe about 20 families. Berexaz was a larger town. Before the war, it had 5,000 from people. My mother's father was a civil engineer. He designed and built roads. Both of my parents used to tell me that Intv was happy. I believe a lot of it was attributed because before the war it was somewhat of a peaceful life and the family was together. They had everybody. Even when my father was in the yeshiva, he told me that anti-Semitism was growing. When he walked the street, the goyim used to make fun of him. On one occasion he told me that a goy sicked a dog on him and bit him. Other times he was kicked. But it was already bleeding over into many of the countries that the anti-Semitism grew and the hatred for Judaism grew as well. At the time of the war, my father was only 19, and it could have been that the Germans got to Slovakia before they got to his hometown. They were systematically going through regions to eliminate and to round up as many people. He had a long discussion with his father, he told me. And they were discussing whether he should enlist and go into forced labor camp or he should stay with the family and go into the ghettos. And his father actually told him that you have a better chance of survival if you go to the forced labor camp. My father figured, he says, okay, let me prepare to leave and go to the labor camp. Remember, he was being separated from his family, his parents, his brothers, and his sister. My father, he knew that he would never see his parents again. When he bid farewell to his father told him, Sei Matzliach. And growing up, every time I either did something or had to go somewhere, he always used the same 2 words, Sei Matzliach. Those were the last 2 words he heard from his father. My mother went to Auschwitz. She was taken at the same time with her parents and 2 of her brothers. While most of the family, she went with her immediate family, there was 1 sibling that did not go at the same time. And when she got to Auschwitz, they were immediately separated. She didn't see her father, she didn't see her mother, didn't see her siblings. But what actually kept her going was that she had 2 older first cousins that kept her in line because she kept crying, I want to go to my mother, I want to go to my mother. And her older cousin, she told me this and was verified by her cousin. If you go to your mother, you will not survive. And then her older cousin gave her a slap on her face. Wake up to reality. Please, don't cry, don't make noise. She was only 15 at the time. Always nervous, it was cold, there was little food. Everything was in a turmoil. She lost everything, from her dignity to her possessions to her family. She was all alone. My mother used to tell me they were mean to her. She was always hungry. At one time, they were moving them from one area to another, from one barracks to another barracks. She described, and you've probably seen pictures, that there were like shelves, literally, in the barracks. But at one point, she got very tired. She almost like fell down, kneeled down, and she was so hungry she took a bite out of the grass. And a German soldier spotted that and actually hit her for it. My father told me at one point that one of his rations were 2 cups of coffee and some bread. And he worked in a munitions plant. It was a steel factory that my father told me that the Germans had offered the Weissman family free passage for the keys to the factory. When it came Rosh Hashanah time, I asked him, well, how did you blow shofar in the factory with the Germans all around? He says it was difficult, but any time there was a flyover of a German plane, that's when they blew shofar. My father, when he was in the labor camp, they didn't sleep in the factory. There were shacks around it. It could have been originally from storage or anything. He couldn't sleep one night, so he ventured out. And he started to walk, and he got real tired, maybe a mile away, 15-minute walk. And he fell asleep under the bench, and he finally realized that it was getting light, and he was heading back to the shack in the morning because he was afraid that when they would take roll call and they would see he wasn't there, he could pay the ultimate price for that. And his hand was on the knob of the door, ready to open it, when he realized, I forgot to wash Nägelwasser. He started to walk away from the shack looking for water. When he was about 100 feet away from the shack, a bomb came down and took out the entire shack. He lost all of his friends, and what saved him was he wanted to do the mitzvah of Nägelwasser. Periodically, there were roll calls in the camp. They were checking to see, is everybody there, is everybody not there? My mother, she survived 4 roll calls, and during 3 of them, she saw Dr. Mengele, known as the Doctor of Death. And my mother described that he used to stand in front of the line with his arm out and his thumb up. And as they were passing through, like cattle would be going through a line, if his thumb went to the right, you survived. If his thumb went to the left, you went to the gas chamber. The last time she saw Dr. Mengele, which was the 4th roll call, she was actually sent to the gas chambers. She was in the gas chamber, and they had sealed the doors. About a minute after the doors were sealed, there was a call from headquarters that they needed 50 girls for a special assignment. They opened the gas chamber, and she was one of the 50 girls that they pulled out of the gas chamber, and that's how she survived. My mother was not liberated from Auschwitz. She was transferred and liberated when the Americans came. She was actually liberated by the Americans. My father's family, the 3 oldest siblings survived. My father's oldest sister, my father, who was the 2nd oldest in the family, and his younger brother immediately under him. The other 2 did not survive. My mother only survived the war with her older brother. The other 3 brothers did not survive the war. My father, of course, took a pair of tefillin. Those tefillin were his tefillin that were given to him at his bar mitzvah. He took those tefillin and he had it with him the entire time during the war. He was zeicher, he told me, to put on tefillin every single day. It was a challenge. But there were 2 days that halachically he was putter from putting on tefillin, and he didn't on those 2 days. Those tefillin survived the war. I asked him at one time, how did those tefillin survive? They did inspections. They kept checking your baggage and everything. He says, I had a very close chaver that when we worked in tandem and we marched together and whatever we did, and any time they came, I used to hand him the tefillin, and when they were checking him, he handed it back. And at one point during the war, he found a pair of tefillin, and he used that 2nd pair of tefillin to cover the tefillin that was really his. And at one point, they did catch it. They confiscated the 2nd pair, and they left his alone, and that's how those tefillin survived. When the Germans were retreating, he wound up getting back to Budapest. They were still rounding up people, and they were trying to keep as much control as they can, but there weren't that many soldiers available, and they were trying to bring all the soldiers back to Germany. So there was a small ghetto referring to an area where they confined a lot of the Jewish people. And there was a multi-story building in that ghetto. When the Germans were starting to last-minute bombing at the time, they were very nervous about staying on the top floor, and they all were heading towards the basement. Going to the basement, and some of the older Yidden that were there had furniture, and my father, being young and able-bodied, offered to a few people to help them move some of their small pieces of furniture and belongings to the basement. And when they finally transitioned and they were all in the basement, this older lady comes over to my father and tells my father, "I have a cup of warm tea for you." First thing my father thought, maybe this is a reward for him helping her in trying to move all the furniture downstairs. And my father says, no, I can't take it from you. She says, "Please, I would like you to take the tea." And my father immediately looked up. If you look in the other end of this room, in the cold basement, there's an older Yid over there. He could benefit a lot more from a warm cup of tea. Why don't you give it to him? He says, no, I really want you to have it. And at that point, she whispered in my father's ear and says, "But it has sugar in it." Now remember, during the war, there was no tea imported. Sugar was rationed because the Germans had access to it. So finding a commodity of sugar and tea was a rarity. And she was trying to entice my father, "Please drink the tea because it has sugar in it." And my father says, "I can't take it from you." And that's when this older lady started to say, "But, I have a son that is about your age. I don't know where he is. I would like you to drink the tea because I hope that there is another mother somewhere out there that would offer a warm tea to my son." And with tears in his eyes, my father said, "I'll drink it." And his thought process was that he imagined that this lady was his mother giving him a glass of tea to her son that he could drink it, only to find out that 6 months earlier, his mother gave her life to Kiddush Hashem. My father gave this to me about 3 years before he passed away, but I've seen it there all the time. And this is a note that he had written. He says, "Chess pieces hand-carved in the Russian POW camp in Segled. Some of the pieces were lost and some I gave to David Leibowitz, a fellow inmate who taught me how to play chess." David Leibowitz actually wound up in Cleveland after the war. I met him. His wife was a Lancelot of my father, came from the same city that my father grew up in. But these are the remaining chess pieces that they had. They were hand-carved, and some of them were colored black. And you can see it all, and this is what he had, and this is what survived the war. My father actually tried to get to Eretz Yisrael. He was determined, but he heard that there was an access point via Italy, and he tried to get to Italy, which he did at that time, and they were trying to get to cross over to Eretz Yisrael, and the British pushed him back. At the time, he heard that the Russians were coming, and that's when he started to head west, as far west as he could, because he didn't want to be under the Russian so-called communist rule. When he got to Germany, my mother was there. They had a Bano section, and they also had a section for boys. My father at the time was giving shiurim of chizuk to the girls, the Yisaimis. And at one point, my mother was in one of those classes that my father gave, and that's where they actually met. Somebody was trying to bring a shidduch to my father, and my father says, "Before you bring me in a shidduch, you must ask the girl if they're willing to move to Eretz Yisrael, because that is a tanai that I'm putting in." When they approached my mother says, "I'm willing to move to Eretz Yisrael." And the shidduch happened. They lived there. I was born in the DP camp, not in the camp itself, there was a hospital outside. And I was there till almost the age 1 year. This is the courtyard of the DP camp, and I'm there as an infant. But nonetheless, he had applied to go to Eretz Yisrael. But when my father wrote my aunt, who was already in Eretz Yisrael, my aunt discouraged him from coming. He says, "You have a wife, you have a child, we just finished the war, there's no food, and there's no jobs. So my father and my mother decided they're going to come to America for 5 years, earn a little bit of money, and then move to Eretz Yisrael. Well, the family grew. My brothers were born. I'm the oldest of 5, and they never went back to Eretz Yisrael. In the later years, my parents told me that they felt that they're Bal Chiyuvim. We made a commitment to move to Eretz Yisrael, and we never had the opportunity. So, Achar Mei v'Esrim Shana, please make sure that we're buried in Eretz Yisrael. And V'kach Hava, they're both in Beit Shemesh. We came to America on a rebuilt battleship, SS General Hershey. They arrived in Boston Harbor August 25th, 1949. My father had papers that my grandmother had a cousin that came to America. They lived in Cleveland. This gentleman, his name was Emery Kleinman, owned a factory, and he found my father through the Hayas. And they came legally, so they boarded a train and arrived in Cleveland on the morning of August 26, 1949. And I have been residing in Cleveland ever since. All those survivors that had families or children, their children have an opportunity to kibbud av ve'em. And if there's anything that you can do, keep that mitzvah, one of the Aseres HaDibros. Always remember the Pintaliyid, that little spark that the Rabbeinu Shalom gives you to take with you. Don't ever let that dwindle.